Hey guys, wanted to make a quick video going through Genesis 1:1 here. We didn't get a chance to look at the actual text of the Hebrew Bible in our video conference, so I wanted to take a moment just to walk through applying the same translation process that we used in some of the previous videos to the actual text. Obviously, going straight into Genesis 1:1, there are things that we have not yet learned that we will run into here. That's fine, I'll note those as we go, but I want you to start seeing the actual text, because if you're just looking at Hebrew in your textbook, you're not seeing everything that the Hebrew text will actually have. So the more you can get acclimated to, the more you can actually look at the Hebrew text in your BHS, the less intimidating it's going to be. So I've obviously got an electronic BHS here, so it'll be a little bit different. You know, the layout is flexible. It's not quite the same as if you were to have, you know, your print BHS in front of you. But at the very least, you'll be able to see most of what your print BHS has. And there's actually, I need to want to make sure I have the textual apparatus stuff turned on here, because you'll definitely see that. Just try to make it as close to your text as possible. That's an unfortunate font, but so we go to Genesis, we go to any book of the Hebrew Bible, you're going to have the name of the book in Hebrew. Obviously, this is the English name. This comes from the Greek Septuagint. Genesis is the Greek word for beginning, and so here, it's a Greek word for beginning. Genesis is more of a process of beginning than a point of beginning. But anyways, Bereshit, most of the books of the Hebrew Bible, I shouldn't say most, but certainly the Torah, the books of the Hebrew Bible are named by the first few words that occur in that book. So you see here, Beit Resh Aleph Shen Yod Tav, Beit Resh Aleph Shen Yod Tav. So the name of Genesis is just the first word. And as we'll see here, this word means in the beginning. So in Hebrew, the book Genesis is called in the beginning. As we look at the actual text, you'll see that over here on the right side, we've got our verse markers. So we've got for the first verse, we've got an abbreviation for the name of the book, and then we've got a chapter and a verse, and then we'll just go down to verses here. So as we start at verse 1, we're just going to go word by word here and kind of pick apart what we're seeing, describe it a little bit to kind of familiarize yourself with the text. So this first word, like I said, this is Bereshit. Bereshit. This word is made up of kind of two words. We've got the bait preposition here. It has a dagesh because it is the beginning of a word, and it has a vocal shava under it. We know this is a vocal shava because any shava in the first letter of a word is vocal. All right, this bait preposition is the preposition that it has a lot of different meanings. It can mean in, at, with, by, a lot of different things. So we'll have to wait until we get more of our translation to make a decision about how we're going to translate the bait preposition. But the word it's attached to here, reshit, this actually comes from the word rosh. Rosh means head or chief. And so reshit here, this is a form of resh, or rosh rather, that means beginning. So reshit, beginning, bait preposition. We could say at beginning, we could say in beginning, we could say on beginning, probably doesn't work too well. But this is almost certainly because reshit is sort of a temporal noun. It has to do with timing. Bait is probably best translated as at. At is one of the at is a temporal translation of bait. Most of our Bibles say in the beginning, and you'll note there's not a sign of the definite article here. Don't read too much into that. The fact that there's no, for example, if this in Hebrew had the definite article, if it was literally in the beginning, we would see a dagesh in the next letter, except resh can't take a dagesh, so it would reject the dagesh and it would lengthen the patak to a kametz. So we would have beit kametz resh if there were a definite article here. Now you could make the argument that since these vowel markings were not part of the original text, these were added, around 1000, 1100 AD, you might say, well, maybe the original writing intended a definite article, but the reason why I want to say don't get too carried away on the absence of article, don't overinterpret that absence, that's probably just a difference between English phrasing and Hebrew phrasing. So, for example, Hebrew may come at it from the perspective of, look, there's only one beginning of something, so you don't really need to add the definite article because a particular time, a particular event, a particular thing doesn't have more than one beginning. So if you're talking about beginning, you're talking about the beginning. So we don't need a definite article. That might be the reason why. I just want to caution you against, well, since there's no definite article, we should translate it as at one of the beginnings or at a beginning, but it may not be the beginning, okay? Just be careful not to over-translate there. All right, so we've got bait preposition, reshit, that means beginning. So we can say either at the beginning or in the beginning. And we do add the in our translation because English doesn't say at a beginning or at beginning. It says at the beginning or in the beginning. So it's okay to add that. Some of the more word-for-word translations will italicize those words that are supplied that don't have a corresponding word in the Hebrew or Greek text. NASB does that sometimes, and the LEB, the Lexham English Bible, both of those translations will often italicize an English word that doesn't have a corresponding word in the original text, but is necessary for understanding in English. All right, so a couple other things that I want to point out to you here. One is this marking under the shin that you may not be familiar with. And we have our hirik. The hirik here is part of the hirik yod, but then we've got this sort of slanty line. This is one of about 40 different accent marks in Hebrew. You don't need to worry about it at this point. We go over the accent marks briefly in the second year of Hebrew, so it's not going to affect your interpretation or translation. It doesn't change the meaning of the word. Often these accent marks are really just serving as kind of like punctuation marks, so commas, semicolons, periods, that sort of a thing. So you don't need to worry about it, but that's what it is. And you'll see almost every word is going to have one of these accent marks somewhere. And then the other thing to point out about this word is this superscript A that you see at the end of it. It's in blue in my screen. When you see these English lowercase letters throughout your text, these are keys or footnotes to the textual apparatus that will be at the bottom of your page. So in my electronic version, the apparatus and the text are actually two different resources. So what I'll do is I'll click on this, and it will open up the apparatus, and I'm just going to put it down here. All right, so now it's more at the bottom of my page like it might be for you. And A, this just says go to A in your apparatus, and I'm going to make this larger so we can take a look at it. Again, a lot of this you're not going to know what to do with. We go over the textual notes, the textual apparatus in second year Hebrew as well, but I just want you to know when you see that A, what it's for. All right, so if we come down to our apparatus, we'll see CP1, this is chapter 1, and then we have a comma 1. So this is chapter 1, verse 1. This tells us what verse we're looking at, because each verse may have it may start over in the lettering of the textual variants. And what this points out, this just gives us some information about different versions of the text. One of the benefits of an electronic edition is all of these confusing abbreviations. If you just hover, it will tell you what it stands for. So this actually refers to the church father Origen, who had, I'm guessing this is his hexapla, but he had Greek translations of the Old Testament. And in his, he actually, he doesn't translate Bereshit, he transliterates it. He takes the Greek letters, basically our equivalent of B, R, this is called a rho, this is a long E sound, it's called an eta, sigma is the S sound, yoda is the I sound, and then theta is the TH sound. So this would be pronounced Bereshit, okay? But then it says vel, and I'm kind of surprised it doesn't have a hover here so you can see what it means. This is a Latin word, and I think it means like reed or something like that. So Baresate or Bareset. These are different readings, I think, that Origen might be pointing to. And then here's some more. This is the Samaritan Pentateuch. And here it says that the Samaritan Pentateuch indicates that it is Ba-Ra-Sit, or no, Ba-Ra-Shit. That little down arrow on the S is the SH sound. So I'm not quite sure, that doesn't look any, I guess what this is saying is the Samaritan Pentateuch indicates that it does have the definite article. It's got the long A here. So keep that in mind. That might be a difference that you might ask yourself, what would the difference in meaning be? But again, we want to be careful to over-translate, or we want to be careful not to over-translate little things like this. We want to understand what the significance might be, but just be very cautious in how much weight we put behind it, especially when we're looking at a variant, okay? So anyways, that might have been a little bit confusing, but that just explains to you what this A is in your text. That's pointing you down to the textual apparatus. All right, so I'll go ahead and close that. We'll go back here to our verse. We've got Bereshit. And again, like I try to tell you in Hebrew, this certainly won't always happen, but generally speaking, especially in Hebrew narrative, you want to anticipate that the predicate is going to come first in your sentence. The predicate, the main part of the predicate is the main verb, but anything that modifies the main verb is also considered part of the predicate. Now, our first word here is a noun, but it's a temporal clause. Not a clause, it's a temporal phrase. Right? It's saying in the beginning something happened. So Bereshit is modifying bara. We get our verb here, and then we'll get Elohim after this, which will turn out to be our subject. But you can see here that we do actually begin with the predicate. Even though the first word is not the main verb, it is part of the predicate because it's modifying this. Bara, created. Well, when created? When did this creating happen? In the beginning. So Bereshit modifies bara here. This is part of the predicate. And then in typical Hebrew word order, as soon as we have our main verb, if we have an explicit subject, that subject will usually come right after that main verb. So bara, this is the CalPerfect 3MS form of bara, he created. And then here it specifies who the he is. Who is the subject of created? Who created? Elohim. So here we have Elohim created in the beginning. And now we might ask, what did he create? Like, is it just he created, period, or did he create something specific? Well, that's when we get our definite direct object marker, okay? So 8 here is saying, whatever comes after me, that's the object. That's what was created. So what did God create in the beginning? Et hashamayim. He created the heavens. And you'll see here that because there's no makef joining 8 to hashamayim, that's why we get the sere vowel instead of the segel. Right? 8 hashamayim. This is shamayim, heaven, or sky, with the definite article, he patak dagesh, created the heaven, or the sky. Now, I've been skipping over the accent marks that occur in each of these words here. I'll come back to those once we get through the verse to talk a little bit about something that might be helpful to you. So, we've got our predicate, or at least our main verb with a modifying temporal phrase. In the beginning, created God. In the beginning, God created. What did he create? Et hashemayim, the heavens. But here we have another eight. The eight ha'aretz, okay? So you'll note that the vav goes on the eight, not on ha'aretz. That's interesting because in English, we don't have this function word eight, so we would just kind of assume that the vav would go on ha'aretz. You might expect eight hashemayim v'ha'aretz. But here, where we've got two different direct objects, or at least two different words functioning as direct objects, we've got two different direct object markers, and the vav goes on the marker here. Ha'aretz, this is eretz with the definite article. Obviously, the aleph can't take a dagesh, so it rejects the dagesh, and we get compensatory lengthening. And then you'll see that the segel of the eretz matches. It converts into a kametz. I can't tell you exactly why that change takes place here. I think it has to do with the fact that we've got an aleph segel that's accented. This has a little bit to do with the fact that when this open syllable, retz begins another syllable, so it's not ar-etz, it's a-retz. When we've got this accented syllable here, and we've got the kametz segel pattern, Hebrew has this preference. I'm assuming this is related to the concept of euphony. Euphony comes from the Greek eu as in good and phonos, which means sound. So it sounds better to the Hebrew ear to have kametz rather than kametz segel. That's a guess on my part, but I think that's why that change takes place. You don't need to know the rules for why the change takes place. You just need to not be confused when you see aretz here and think, well, it can't be eretz because it's not spelled the same. This is eretz, it's just when it has the definite article here, and it's accented. It also might have to do with the fact that this is the final word of the verse. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But before I get into the accents here, I want to take a look at the syntax. So let's go through the sentence now and ask our syntax questions, or our function questions. We're trying to get at what are the functions of the different words in this sentence. We talked a little bit about that, but let's just go through and kind of smooth all that out. So what is the function of bereshit here? We talked about how this is a temporal phrase that's modifying the main verb, which means that bara then is our main verb. Elohim is a noun, but nouns can have lots of functions in sentences. They can be subjects, they can be objects, they can be indirect, well, I guess indirect objects would be a type of object, but they can be predicate nominatives. They can function a lot of different ways. We've also got these nouns over here that we decided are direct objects. So as we go through here, let's think through and let's step into that stage 2 of translations where we try to figure out how English would build this sentence. So when we start an English sentence, we first have to think, how does an English sentence begin? What does English structure ask for first? And so English wants the subject first. The only time that's really not the case is in like a command or an imperative where the subject is missing. So go to the store has no explicit subject there. Or in questions. When we have a question in English, we usually start with the verb or some sort of helping verb. So we would either say, can you run quickly? Something like that. Did you go to the store? Will you eat a hamburger? These are questions that begin with a helping verb. And so those are the times when English maybe won't begin with the subject. But in any kind of a statement, we're going to have the subject first. So as we come to our sentence here and we look through, we got to ask, what is our subject? Now, the subject would have to be a noun or a pronoun. And we've got 3 nouns here. We've got, well, technically we've got 4. We've got reshit, which is beginning, but we already talked about how that is modifying the verb. We've got Elohim as a noun. We've got Shemayim as a noun, and we've got Aretz as a noun. We know that Ha'aretz and Hashemayim are functioning as the direct object, so they can't be the subject. The only thing that's left as a possibility is going to be Elohim. Now, if Elohim is the subject, it will have to agree with the verb in person, gender, and number. Now, person is a little bit tricky for nouns rather than pronouns because nouns don't have person. Pronouns have person, but Elohim doesn't really have a person. In that sense, it would probably have to be. The only nouns that would be first or second person would be like proper names, or I should say personal names, something like that, or titles maybe. If I were to say, Jeremy, bring me, or Jeremy, I'm trying to think of what, it would have to be a command or something like that, where I would use a name as a noun, but that would be second person because I'm addressing Jeremy. But most other nouns are going to function as third person. So we do have a third person verb, and then we have to match the number and the gender. So Elohim, we see that hirik yod mem ending, and so we think to ourselves, well, that is a masculine plural ending, and our verb is masculine singular. But this is the trick with Elohim. Because Elohim is the word that gets used for Israel's single God, it is semantically singular. I know that the form is plural, but the meaning is singular here. And we know that because Elohim really can play no other role in this sentence. It pretty much has to be the subject. There's nothing else for it to do. It can't really be a direct object. So in the beginning, he created God, the heavens and the earth. Hebrew would use an and if God, even though it doesn't have a, like, let's say it is indefinite, created a God. Well, in that case, we wouldn't have the definite direct object marker, but we would certainly have a vav conjunction here or something like that. So there's really no other role for Elohim to play than subject. So Elohim is our subject. So that's what we're going to start with in English. We're going to begin our English sentence with God, okay? So we have God. What else is English going to use after the subject? Well, we'll use anything that modifies the subject. So if there's some sort of attributive adjective or something like that, we might include that. But there's nothing modifying Elohim in this sentence. So now we're going to go to the second chunk of an English sentence, which is the predicate, specifically the verb, the main verb. And so that's going to be bara. Bara means created. Don't think in your translation process that bara means he created, because that's going to give you a problem. Your translation is going to say, God, he created, and that's not English. English doesn't reiterate with a personal pronoun when you have the explicit subject mentioned. So we're not going to use he in our translation here. We're just going to replace the he pronoun with God. God created. All right, so now that we have our subject in and we have our main verb in, what does English use next? Well, usually it's going to, if we don't introduce any indirect object with a preposition like to or for, so for whom did God create? Then we would put the indirect, so think of it this way. If I were to say I gave the boy a ball, that would be the same thing as saying I gave the ball to the boy. English does this weird thing when we mark our indirect object with the preposition to or for, the indirect object comes after the direct object. I gave the ball to the boy. I won the game for my team. When we have to or for in front of the indirect object, it comes after the direct object. But when we don't have to or for in front of the indirect object comes first. It's really strange. So that's why we can say, I gave the ball to the boy, or we can say, I gave the boy the ball. When I say I gave the boy the ball, the boy is not the direct object. I'm not giving the boy, I'm giving the ball. The boy receives the action of the verb, but the boy is not himself acted upon. And so that's a weird thing that English does that you might pick up on eventually. So we might at this point ask, now that we have our subject, now that we have our predicate, we might check and see if there's any indirect object in this sentence. And to find an indirect object, we have to go through and look for nouns that can fulfill that role. Well, the only other nouns besides Elohim are Bereshit, and we already talked about how this is a temporal phrase, so that is not the indirect object. And then Shemaim and Haaretz, those are direct objects, so there is no indirect object here. So now let's ask about direct objects. And it might make sense to start with the direct objects first because, one, if your sentence has an indirect object, it's going to have a direct object, I think. I don't think there's any exceptions to that. So you will more commonly have a direct object than you will an indirect object. So maybe in your prioritization, first look for subjects, then look for verbs, then look for direct objects. And so what are our direct objects here? Well, those are marked because they're both definite with the definite direct object marker. There are no indefinite direct objects in this sentence. So now we're going to add in our direct objects. We've got God created. What did he create? The sky or the heaven and the earth. And if you don't want to say the heaven, you can either say the heavens or you can just say heaven. God created the heavens and the earth. Now, once we're done, we see that we still have Bereshit here. We have to figure out where to put that in our English sentence. And English would probably put this in one of two places. It may keep it at the beginning, like Hebrew does, and we might just say, in the beginning, God created the sky and the earth, which is how most translations translate it. Or we might put it at the very end. God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning. Either one is fine. But you have to make sure that those major chunks, the subject, the main verb, the direct objects, that those are in the particular order. Subject, verb, object is how English puts sentences together. Hebrew usually goes verb, subject, object. So make sure when you're building your translation, you're actually building the English word order rather than the Hebrew word order. We'll go ahead and stop there, and maybe the next video we'll pick up with verse number 2. Hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions.